Cool figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. We got a World War III update. U.S. Apache hit by Iran. Trump is very upset. But before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, I've been having some technical difficulties with my equipment. But we're going to get through this live today, and I'm going to get y'all some news y'all can use. Let's get right into the content.
We have an Apache that has been shot down in the Straits of Hormuz. This is what they're calling an Iran war first. So we have one of our main helicopters taken out of the sky. There's a lot of choppy details here as to what happened. Iran saying they took it down. They shot it down. The U.S. saying they're not sure what went on. It could have been mechanical failure, but they've been trying to deny any hits this entire time. We've seen the warship, all the footage there, and they were covering up that. That took major damage. And the bases also in Kuwait and UAE have been hammered, wiped out. There's footage and satellite images of it. They were trying to keep it under wraps. But the two pilots of this Army AH-64 Apache were rescued by this reconnaissance drone, a water drone. It can operate as like a little bit of a sub or a boat, and it crept up and it snatched these guys up and then rescued them, took them back to safety. Again, this would be the first. And Trump constantly saying that Iran has no navy, that they're at the bottom of the ocean and this and that. Well, that's proven not to be true as well. So this is an escalation, no doubt. The pilots, they say, are fine. The Apaches, along with A-10 gunships, they often fly pretty low in these areas, so they're susceptible to getting hit. They can also see targets from miles and miles and miles away. One of these Apaches could hit someone and they never even know where it came from. But again, a first of the war. It doesn't look like this whole thing is going to be settled anytime soon. I'd really get a plan together for things going through the roof because nothing is getting settled, period. And on the end, this whole thing with Netanyahu and Trump says that they're going to cool off for a week or so, which means you got a whole nother week or so before any talks or anything is even going to go into motion. Join me for the live streams Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern for more updates on this. Much love.
Very excited now to be joined by our great friend of the show, Professor Robert Pape of the University of Chicago. It's good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and start with B1. This really caught our interest, Professor. Curious for your reaction. The commander of the IRGC Quds Force issued a very interesting statement yesterday. He said that they would establish a new security belt of resistance that from the Strait of Hormuz to the Bab al-Mandeb Strait off of Yemen, and then to the Gulf to the Red Sea. According to these new comments by state media, they are now using the term resistance or axis of resistance to refer to Iranian allies in the region region from Hezbollah to Yemen's Houthis. What do you make of this new term of the axis of resistance, this security belt comment in the context of everything that's been happening here in this war?
This is more evidence for the new stage of the war that we've entered into. We just passed day 100 of the Iran war. There is no end in sight. We are not at the end. We are in the middle game. And in the middle game, the most distinctive feature, which has happened for weeks, and this, what you just showed, is strong evidence of it, is that Iran has moved from survival to ambition. Let me say that again. Iran is no longer just considering how does it survive. Iran is moving from survival to ambition. You see that in its behavior. You see that a week ago, it responds to relatively minor strikes here by the U.S. by upping the ante to put pressure on Kuwait and Bahrain. They are not just doing tit for tat. They are using a version of their own escalation dominance to put pressure on those Gulf states to withdraw American forces from their territory. Almost at the same time, they threaten Israel. You attack Hezbollah's strongholds in Beirut, that's Iran's key ally, and Iran is going to punish, going to retaliate. This is part of that new red line that you just showed. They are extending an umbrella. They are not just worrying about survival in Tehran. They're extending an umbrella, a new architecture. That is a new ambition. And then last week, right at the end of last week, the senior advisor to the supreme leader made a statement almost identical to what you just showed, except did not define the umbrella area so clearly. Used the same geographic space, by the way, but not that clear set of red lines. So what you are seeing is that Iran has gained power in the opening stage. That's like the opening in chess. It has gained power. And in the middle game, it's not just happy going for a draw. It's going to extend that power in a more ambitious way. And that middle game with this new security architecture, and I'm glad to say a bit more about that, but this middle game, this is going to go on, folks, through the summer. We are almost surely now going to have the new crisis in the world economy based on Iran's behavior and rhetoric. This is almost locked in. The world may not fully expect it, but this is what you would expect. This is what the direction of the modeling for the 20 years would expect. And then I'm sorry to also say this is not just going to end on Labor Day. Donald Trump extended the naval blockade to Labor Day as if this is going to be over by Labor Day, which of course very convenient for him with the midterms. However, that's not where Iran's thinking is. If Iran can hurt its opponents through the midterms, as the United States and also Israel, Netanyahu has elections coming, it's going to take advantage of that. So we need to expect that this middle game is going to go on through the summer, through the new economic crisis, into the fall and midterms, and probably into January. That's the true middle game we are facing.
Wow. So if that's where Iran is, they've moved from survival to ambition. What is Trump's perspective? What are his thoughts? Because we've been tracking on the show how you had the situation where Israel was struck by Iran. Trump tells a bunch of reporters, I don't want Israel to retaliate. Then Israel retaliates anyway. He's now saying, oh, well, I understand that they had to do that limited strike, but now they're done. But of course, this morning we see headlines that they continue to strike inside of Lebanon. So in any case, what do you think is going on in terms of Trump's calculus and how all of that unfolded?
Yeah, so what Trump is doing, first let's just explain, as Iran has gained power, America has lost strategic position. These are a direct trade-off of each other. Trump's rhetoric and phone calls and statements are as if he was still the dominant power. He is acting as if he is still in control. In fact, he has been saying, I am in control. Well, the fact is, Trump is losing control as his strategic position has declined. And control is not defined by what the actor President Trump says, I have control. It's defined by how others are reacting. So point number one, the Iranians have said, and this is what the advisor to the Supreme Leader said late last week, that they're just going to ignore what Trump says about negotiations. It's not they're going to respond to it tit for tat. They're just ignoring him. They don't think it has any reality, and they've laid out their demands in public, which means they're digging their heels in, and they don't really care what President Trump says anymore. At least that's what they've said, and their behavior would reflect that. Israel also, Netanyahu is still taking President Trump's calls. Okay, so I'm not saying that they've gone that far as not taking the call. They're taking the call, but Netanyahu did not follow Trump's orders. Trump tried to order Netanyahu not to retaliate. And what happened? Netanyahu launched airstrikes on Iran in Western and Central Iran against some key targets. So this is the opposite of listening to President Trump. President Trump is losing control because his behavior and rhetoric has been as if he had not lost that strategic position.
Right.
Well, in war, the realities dictate everything. You can try to have your happy talk, and that's what President Trump is doing. But this is being ignored because the happy talk is irrelevant. We all see the realities, and that's true in much of the American public. That's true in the leadership. And that is why President Trump's words seem to have no reality to them. It's because there is no reality to his words. And we know this. How long has it been? Let me just ask you, and the listeners should ask, how long has it been that they have heard President Trump say that the negotiations with Iran are just about to be settled? Well, I went back before we came on. I just thought I would just check for myself, and this could be a game that listeners could do on Google. I found it goes back to March 29th. Okay, so that's 72 days of this. Now, if your listeners can, it's like beat the professor. Maybe I missed one before March 29th. So just let me know if they found one going back earlier than March 29th.
Yeah.
But that's 72 days of almost every day or every other day hearing. We're only days away from the deal with Iran. So you could see as Iran's ambitions grow, as it extends its umbrella, it's spreading its wings, why he would be losing control.
Mm-hmm. Professor, you had a prediction here, or just a statement on our show many months ago. You said Iran has become a new regional world power. I put that clip out. I got quite a lot of criticism, mostly from the Israeli lobby. And what I found fascinating, actually, is watching some of this proof out. And so yesterday, when we saw Iran enforce its red line of strikes on Lebanon, for the first time in its modern history, to actually use that as a pretext explicitly to enforce regional action, how did that prove out that original statement that you made, to watch such a change in their own strategic behavior?
Yeah, so to be clear, I made that public statement in a New York Times piece on April 4th,
that's right.
where I said Iran is emerging as the fourth center of world power. And also, to be clear, I didn't say that that would happen in a day. I said it would take about 18 months. They were on a trajectory to do that. And I didn't say they would become stronger than the United States. So some people, when you get in these debates, they kind of straw man it a little bit to say but Iran would be the fourth center of world power. Now, what did I mean by that? The United States is the strongest state in the world, and it's a hegemon in its region of the world, the Western Hemisphere. China is the second strongest, and it wants to be and almost is a hegemon in Asia. Russia is the third strongest, and it is vying to become the hegemon in Eastern Europe. That's what's happening with the battle with Ukraine. And who else is a hegemon? There's no other regional hegemons. Iran would be the fourth regional hegemon in the Gulf. That is the dominant state in the Gulf. And what does that look like? That looks like a state which has a sphere of influence, not just worrying about its own narrow protection. And that's what's true of all those other three states. And also, I believe this will also mean that it will protect its allies. And that's exactly what you are seeing here. So this is, we're used to thinking of Hezbollah as like the puppet or the pawn that is expendable to support Iran. This is the other way around. This is Iran establishing a sphere of influence, and it's also extending to the Houthis. So if there's a whole sphere here that is being defined. And that's a sphere of influence, and it is acting to do. And by the way, it's gaining success because its threats, its stronger power, compelled President Trump to make those phone calls to put pressure on Israel to pull back. And the fact is, without Iran gaining power, Donald Trump would never have made those phone calls on the behavior just because Iran was making a threat. So you are seeing reality to that prediction I made 2 months ago, and this will go on over time. I believe Iran's position as the fourth center of world power will emerge drip by drip by drip. Over the summer, this will get even stronger because as the crisis hits the world's economy, basically end of June to July, we don't know the exact date, but we know that it's coming. This will strengthen Iran's position in the region and also in the world. So you are seeing the emergence of a fourth center of world power right in front of our eyes. I'm not surprised people were skeptical of this argument because we haven't seen that in our lifetime.
Right.
When was the last time you saw the emergence of a center of world power? Not in our lifetime. That China happened very, very slowly and was already a pretty powerful state. You have to go to back history. This is like Prussia in the 19th century to really kind of put this in some historical perspective.
That's fascinating.
So it's not truly unique, and it's a function of not just the economy of Iran. That's how we often measure power, just raw economy. It's the geography. It is the geography plus the technology. That's what helped Prussia. So this is a little bit different calculus. We have seen bits of this before, but I am not surprised there was some pushback. And I believe this is going to be one of the gigantic outcomes. It's going to reshape the world coming out of this war. This war is not like the Greenland issue. It's not like Venezuela. This is a different animal. Was always going to be a different animal. And I really appreciate the fact that I've been able to talk about this on your show. I also appreciate the New York Times taking the risk because they got enormous
absolutely.
Got hammered for it.
Everybody said, "What are you talking about? That's who's blah, blah, blah." But now you're seeing the reality. And by the way, that's just another prediction that's coming out of all this modeling, thinking about the bombing of Iran. This would not be happening had President Trump not bombed Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's fascinating because it's really attributable to this combination of modern military tech with the drones, et cetera, and also sort of old school just geographic position in the world. So it really is this very unique,
if I could just make a suggestion for your listeners, because a lot of your listeners they should go and look at a piece by Halford McKinder called The Geographic Pivot of History. 1904,
wow.
British geographer, and they will see that, yes, it's not always been true. We've measured great power simply by raw GDP, because that's how he explained what was happening to Britain as Prussia was consolidating and why that geography mattered so much.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about is how this changes the game for Israel. They have our support. They've bombed something like 7 countries over the past several years, have de facto annexed parts of Syria, have de facto annexed, most of Gaza, taken complete control over the West Bank, have now invaded and taken control over parts of Lebanon, and have been able to do all of this basically with impunity. You'd have to think that this new reality would, constrain them quite significantly in ways that they aren't used to in recent years.
It's going to, and it's going to constrain them more over time. And I'll be writing pieces about this on the Substack, by the way, because it's part of the new emerging reality. But don't think that it's going to stop all at once, but you're seeing the beginning of this change now. So what you can expect over time is, as that new security architecture becomes solidified, and it's only in its early stages, as it becomes solidified, Israel's position is going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. Now, that's going to happen for 2 reasons, not just one reason. Reason number 1 is Israel's strategic position is a function very heavily of America's strategic position. So as America's strategic position weakens in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf, and it is weakening at now, this inherently weakens Israel's position. But number 2, what's going to happen as time goes on is you will see evolutions with the drone and missile capability of Iran's proxy. So we already know that Hezbollah and the Houthis have missile and drone capability. That's not the change. The change, and you're starting to see it just in the last 24 hours, is much more sophisticated, concerted effort with those missiles and drones to think in a calibrated way how to weaken Israel. And so what you see is that we had the issue, of course, with Israel, Lebanon. Everybody's focused on that. But I have been watching the Red Sea and the Houthis. And I haven't been surprised by what we saw in the last 24 hours, which is that the Houthis have stepped into this issue. And what they have done is they are threatening any Israeli-related traffic around the Red Sea, that choke point. Well, that is now an expansion to that new theater. Think of it as a new part of the theater here, a new area that is now expanding in a coherent way, just as your opening quote suggested. And that is going to weaken Israel over time, because those drones, those missiles can be used in a much more concerted way. And this is just the beginning for Israel. And notice that if America and Israel together couldn't root out all the drones and missiles here, as America gets weaker and its position gets weaker in the Middle East, Israel on its own is not going to be able to do that either. So this is a picture of a grand strategic, not quite collapse, but kind of reduction here, decline for Israel over time. But you're just seeing the early stages of this, and this trajectory is likely to go on as far as the eye can see.
As always, thought-provoking and usually correct on a long timeline. So thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below.
Now, as we speak, the U.S. is attacking Iran, try to save face. Iran gonna have to spank them again for doing that. So it's gonna be a tit for tat, y'all.
powerful deal with Iran, and
So
maybe this war can come to an end,
recorded
or
on
maybe
the
not.
earliest date.
Maybe it'll just continue to drift on inconsequentially forward. Who can say? But maybe we'll need to go
Look
back
at the
to war.
update, but the U.S. is attacking Iran right now.
To all of that is in the offering today, and we're going to try to find out how close are we actually to an end of negotiation, and most importantly, we're going to see what does the Iranian side have to say about this, and how close do they think that we are. You can't get a deal unless you have both sides coming to one mutual understanding, and we'll see how close we actually are today. And there's literally no one better than on our show to try to assess where the Iranian side is than our good friend, Professor Saeed Mohammad Morandi, who is the professor at Tehran University, former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiating team, and combat veteran of the Iraq War, I always like to point out. Professor, as always, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a great pleasure.
Listen, I do want to, even before we start talking about this subject at hand, just minutes ago, President Trump out on Truth Social kind of dropped this out of nowhere. He said, I have just been informed by our great military that last night the Iranians shot down one of our highly sophisticated Apache helicopters while patrolling over the Strait of Hormuz. There were 2 pilots involved. Both are safe and uninjured. Nevertheless, the United States must, of necessity, respond to this attack. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Interestingly, I have here that I looked in the Washington Post to see this because this kind of took me a little bit by surprise. And the Washington Post is reporting that, of course, that it happened. It was all over the news last night. But it says that 2 crew members were rescued by American forces within about 2 hours after the helicopter was lost at sea and are in stable condition. The cause of the incident is under investigation. This is as of 1 hour ago. It was not clear whether the helicopter was shot down or suffered a mechanical failure or something else. And it went on to say that the Central Command had not issued a statement. They had not made any comment on it. So at that point, like 1 hour ago, according to the news, there's no idea. Now, all of a sudden here, just minutes ago, President Trump says, oh, yeah, it was shot down and we're going to have to respond. What do you make of this? Did Iran shoot down the helicopter?
I asked an Iranian official, military official, shortly before the show, and he said that this has nothing to do with Iran, and it must have had a mechanical failure, and that for whatever reason, Trump is looking for an excuse. I would imagine that, and he also, just to make sure, asked another relatively high-ranking official who also said that yes, that this has nothing to do with Iran, and Trump is making this up. So, assuming this to be the case, I think that it has something to do with Netanyahu, of course, and also the fact that Trump has been saying that there's going to be a deal in the next couple of days, and obviously there has been no movement on the American side for a deal. In fact, it's been the opposite. Trump has been saying things that are in contrast to what his negotiators have written down on paper. And the issues that were more or less agreed upon, Trump has rejected. And he did this also a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, where he said, this time around, he said, I'm not handing over Iranian assets. That's what his negotiators wrote down on paper. I'm not going to remove the sanctions. The removal of sanctions or the lifting of sanctions for the Iranian oil or energy sector during the period of the agreement. That is something that was more or less agreed upon. And he said the Iranians must hand over that dust, to the nuclear dust, which of course Iran has not agreed to do. That's not a part of the first stage of the agreement in any case. So these sort of statements that completely contradict what American negotiators send to Iran we have to remind ourselves there isn't a final text, but the agreement is the general framework of the agreement. I think we all have heard about, and we know the details. So he is moving away from the agreement, and perhaps this helicopter which fell provided him with an excuse to please the Zionist lobby, which may not be too happy about his position on the airstrikes on Beirut and the bombing of the city, and it may be also an excuse to escape the fact that he promised a deal in a couple of days, and that there is nothing prepared for the two sides to agree upon.
You know, it's a lot of mixed signals coming out of Washington just within the last number of hours, I guess. First of all, back to Sunday, kind of think you mentioned to it a second ago, Kristen Welker of NBC News as President Trump. Would you be willing to do some things up front, which the Iranian side has said, you on our show and several other officials, that because there is no trust. I think it was the Supreme Leader's senior military advisor was on an interview, and he said that we've got to build trust, and you can do that by first releasing our $24 billion in frozen assets, and also the relief of sanctions on our energy sector. And those are good trust, confidence building measures so that we can get into subsequent things. President Trump was asked, will you do that? And he just categorically said no yesterday. So that would seem to say, all right, then we're at a major impasse. And yet just last night, in front of the tarmac, in front of his airplane, he said this.
I don't think there are any sticking points. I think we're very close to having a very, very good, strong, powerful deal. If we go and bomb, which we can do very easily if we want, and we spend another 2 or 3 weeks bombing, they'll have nothing left whatsoever, but you won't have the Strait open for months. If we do the bombing, a lot of people are going to be killed. Who wants to do that? I don't. And we'll have a signed document that's actually stronger than doing the bombing. What has proven to be a very powerful thing is the blockade. The blockades turned out to be much stronger than bombing. And it was really a combination. It was our initial thrust and then the blockade. But, their economy is really suffering, and they're going to make a deal.
They're going to make a deal. Now, I want to get to some of that stuff in a second. There's a number of things, but let's start off with front, because he just said on Sunday, I'm not going to release any money up front. Absolutely not going to be like Obama. But then now here last night, he says, yeah, I think we're really close to a deal and we're going to get one. What do you say?
As far as I know, there's no deal in sight. He will have to give Iranian assets to the Iranians at the very beginning, at the very start of the deal. It's just not going to happen otherwise. And if he really cares about people, which he doesn't, obviously, he's a psychopath, he would stop the slaughter in Lebanon and Gaza. The ceasefire in Gaza is his. Every day they're slaughtering large numbers of Palestinians, especially during the last few weeks. There's been a sharp rise in the number of Palestinians that are being slaughtered every day. And Western media is quiet. It's as if they don't really care anymore. I mean, they never cared, but anyway. And now what they're doing in Lebanon, I mean, I just tweeted images from southern Lebanon, huge, airstrikes and carpet bombing in southern Lebanon in order to make up for the fact that they can't carpet bomb southern Beirut because they wanted to flatten southern Beirut. It's sort of like saying, let's flatten New York, or let's flatten. I mean, it's just these people are so satanic that they've just normalized everything. I think there's a certain numbness in this world now with regards to what the Zionists do. But so he has no problem with killing. But I think that what is going to happen now is that the United States will initiate some sort of military attack on Iran, and Iran is going to retaliate, and we'll have to see where that leads us. And also, there's a strong possibility that the Iranians will strike at the Israeli regime again, because they are carpet bombing southern Lebanon as we speak. So it's a very complicated situation.
I did want to get to that issue at all. In fact, to try to get there, I want to back up just a little bit to get your view on how the Iranian side suggests that things happened last weekend or towards the end of last week, because it was a series of events. First of all, the Israeli side, after being warned repeatedly not to attack a certain area in Beirut, they did anyway. And then Iran had been saying, if you do that, then we're going to respond. Then they did. The Iranian side sent missiles into Israel. Israel claimed that they were all intercepted, but then Trump said to Iran, hey, okay, let that be enough. You fired your missiles. Okay, good. Let's get back to the table. And he told Israel, don't do anything in response. Israel did something in response. So neither Iran nor Israel listened to President Trump at that time. And then finally, Trump claims that he told both Israel and Iran to stop it, don't ramp up anymore. And both sides did eventually stop after that back and forth, that kind of tit for tat. What was the Iranian side's thinking, and why did they stop after they had that initial response?
Well, the Iranians struck because the Israeli regime was planning on flattening Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. What is happening right now is that the Israeli regime is flattening southern Lebanon. They're creating a multiple Gazas across the south, and the West knows it. And there are no sanctions. Western, European parliaments don't condemn it. They don't sanction Israel. The European Parliament itself doesn't do anything. Western governments don't do anything. Western journalists look away, and they use this despicable phrase that they're striking Hezbollah targets or Hezbollah strongholds, meaning villages and cities. And all we see are families slaughtered and kids being taken out of the rubble. That's all we see. And yet the West wants to pretend that it's otherwise. But the Iranians saw that they were so for months they've been carpet bombing the south. Close to 4,000 people in Lebanon have been slaughtered, a small country, during these 3 months. And the Lebanese government, which is basically a proxy of the United States, the president and prime minister were installed by the United States under duress, and they don't have a popular mandate. In the last elections, those supporting them, their votes were much smaller in number than the votes of the coalition that supported Hezbollah, the alliance that Hezbollah was the leading partner in. So the government in Lebanon, what they've been doing is they've been preventing the refugees from the south of Lebanon from leaving, from going to different parts of the country. So people in Lebanon are being prevented from going to other parts of their own country. And Western embassies and Western NGOs are encouraging this. They're telling their allies in Lebanon, the factions that are linked to the West, not to let them into their neighborhoods. And then the Takfiri, the Wahhabi, the Salafi groups that, or those funded by Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Emirates, they too are trying to restrict the movements of these refugees. So what the government and, of course, the Al-Qaeda government in Syria, they too are blocking the border to help strangle Hezbollah. So you have the Israeli regime, the Al-Qaeda regime, and the proxy government in Beirut all surrounding the resistance and the supporters of the resistance and preventing aid from coming in. They block any aid from Iran, tents, food, and from Iraq. So they want to strangle the people in the south. They want them bombed, homeless, and strangled and incapable of movement. So this is this conspiracy that, it's the American camp in the region that's behind it, from the Persian Gulf Arab dictatorships to the NGOs and the embassies in Beirut. So Dahieh, or southern Beirut, was the last place of refuge for most of these people. And a lot of people from the south went into Dahieh. So it's an area with hundreds of thousands of people. Some couldn't. There's just no more space. They had to go back to the south because the government won't let them go anywhere else. And they were bombed and many were killed. So the government has helped the Israelis kill lots of people in the south. But Dahieh is now overpopulated because many refugees have gone there. And so the Israelis said we have to flatten Dahieh, flatten southern Beirut. And that would mean a catastrophic situation, worse than what we saw in Gaza. So the Iranians warned the Israeli regime that if you do that, we'll hit you. And then we saw the Trump-Netanyahu exchange, where Trump allegedly, according to Axios, which I don't trust at all in anything, but I think this is probably valid, he had that interaction with Netanyahu and attacked him. I personally think that some powerful people in the White House, Israeli firsters even, the Zionist class, they probably put it out there because they feel Netanyahu's he should gradually leave the scene. That's my thinking, because that statement that went down very badly in the Hebrew media the next day, and Netanyahu's opponents were attacking him, even his allies were attacking him. It didn't look good for him, that statement. I mean, I know that Axios lies a lot, and a lot of these differences are put out for show. Last year at this time, we're at the anniversary of the assault on Iran, the first war. And back then, Axios said Trump and Netanyahu have differences, and then they attacked. So that was just fake. The same was true with Biden. They said Biden and Netanyahu differences, which was all for show. But this, I think there's something in it. And then, of course, Netanyahu did attack. He carried out not a major attack on southern Beirut, but I think he wanted to make it a small attack. 2 people were murdered, ordinary people, but I think he wanted it to be small enough so that Iran wouldn't retaliate, and then so that he could gradually normalize bombing Beirut. But the Iranians said no, and they hammered the Israeli regime, and then we saw the Israelis' response, and then the Iranians attacked again until basically the Americans promised that, or they promised that Beirut wouldn't be struck. And as for the moment, Beirut is not being attacked, but the regime is compensating in its rage by carpet bombing southern Lebanon. I mean, this is like the sinister nature of this regime is something like it's like one of those movies that you see in the cinema where you have an exaggerated antagonist, where the antagonist of the movie is some sort of exaggerated monster, where he's twisting his mustache. Yeah, I mean, this is what Zionism is. It's just like beyond belief that this could be happening in front of the eyes of the world.
Well, and I want to go on that point right there you just mentioned here, because they may not have hit into Beirut itself, but they did pound into Tyre. And you can see Israeli forces killed 9 people in Tyre city after issuing forced displacement orders as it continues deadly attacks on southern Lebanon. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's in the, quote, final throes of a deal with Iran, which we just talked about a second ago, implying it could come within days, which he's been saying for months. But then the last part here, Iran warns fighting will resume if Israel continues its aggression, including bombing in Lebanon. So that's the question. Why does Iran draw a line in the Diha area of southern Beirut and not just any of the other Lebanese cities like Tyre?
Well, I think the Iranians simultaneously, through this siege warfare that exists with Trump, which of course Trump says Iran is suffering, but he doesn't acknowledge that he's strangling the global economy simultaneously. The Iranians wanted to halt this in Beirut, and then they put out a vague threat against the Israeli regime about the slaughter in the south. But also through the siege warfare, the Iranians want to put pressure on the United States to push the Israeli regime to end this. But ultimately, if the Israeli regime continues the onslaught in southern Lebanon and the massacre of civilians like this, the Iranians are going to respond. Also, the Iranians have, while Gaza has always been a part of the equation for Iran, in other words, in the agreement, in the potential agreement with the Americans, it says across the region and Lebanon, all the wars must end. But the Iranians are now putting extra emphasis on Gaza. That Gaza must, the carnage in Gaza has to end. The genocide in Gaza has to be stopped.
Well, and let's take a look at those in order here. And interestingly, also the Israeli side, the IDF chief, this is in just minutes ago, said that Israel planned much more significant and severe blow to the Iranian regime if President Trump had not stopped them on, I think it was Monday. They claimed they were ready to go on Monday, but they're prepared to return for war. So meanwhile, I think also the Iranian side, Foreign Minister Arakchi also reiterated Tehran's support for Hamas and that they are prepared to return to conflict too. So what are the possibilities here that we may be getting close to not to a peace, but to returning back to active combat operations?
I think we're getting very close to war, and the Iranians are prepared. And the Iranians have also warned the Americans that if the Israeli regime strikes Iranians' critical infrastructure across the region, and Israeli critical infrastructure will be destroyed. Because the Israeli regime cannot wage war against Iran without U.S. help, and the U.S. is assisted by these regimes in the Persian Gulf. So if they go after our electrical power plants, that's it for the Emirates, Kuwait, and so on. They go out. So this war is going to be, I think, potentially far more consequential than the 39-day war. This is going to escalate very quickly, and I think the Red Sea will be shut down by Yemen. And I think we discussed this before on your show. I think that if we go where it is possibly where things seem to be heading, then I think that a global economic depression, a very deep global economic depression, is inevitable. And I think really people don't quite understand what this means. We are heading for very, very dangerous times, but the Iranians are not going to back down by any means. They are prepared for an all-out war, and so is the axis of resistance in Iraq, in Yemen. They're fully prepared.
And back to the situation in Lebanon, if let's say that Israel says, all right, we'll keep the Dahia area off, we'll keep Beirut off the target list, but we'll keep pounding away on these other sides. Is there a limit to when Iran may say, okay, anywhere in Lebanon, as long as you keep attacking the Palestinian people that live there, we're going to go inside, or the Lebanese people, we're going to hit anyway? Is there a point that Iran may initiate strikes against Israel again for that continued aggression?
Yes, I think that will ultimately happen. And I think if the United States carries out an attack, which I think it will now that Trump has said he will, then I think probably these two will be, I mean, it's quite possible. I mean, I'm just speculating, but it's quite possible that it will be the Israeli regime, the U.S., the Trump regime, and the Iranians engage in war. And of course, Yemen this time around will immediately come in, and so will the resistance in Iraq. The resistance in Iraq this time around, they'll be far more aggressive than last time. That's my understanding of the situation.
So that's not a very optimistic and hopeful look that we're just days away from having this thing wound down. And maybe you've kind of already answered this question, but whatever Trump does in response to this alleged helicopter shoot down, is there any chance that you see that Iran would just suck it down, because presumably it's going to be something commensurate, so it'll be a small strike? What would be your guess? I know you're not the Iranian government, you're not the military, so you can't speak for them, but what is your understanding? What would you expect Iran to do if Trump does something relatively small in response to this alleged helicopter shutdown?
I think Iran will hit back, and it will not be a token response. It'll be a substantial response, because if you, as I'm sure you recall, you know better than I, the last two times the Americans struck Iran, the Iranian response was very heavy-handed, especially the second to last, but also the last one. So the Iranian responses have, during the last two occasions, and then the Iranian strike on the Israelis, have shown a higher level of intensity than on previous occasions. So every time the United States, I mean, the U.S. has violated the ceasefire many times, but every time the Iranian response was sort of a similar, let's say, a similar height of military activity. But the last two times, Iran was much more heavy-handed. I think that that's probably the Iranian policy now, to be hit back very hard as a means of deterrence. But again, if this becomes war, then I think that the energy facilities in the Persian Gulf will probably be destroyed, and the Strait of Hormuz will be shut down. That means Saudi oil will no longer be available on the markets, and another trade that goes through the Red Sea will come to an abrupt end. You know, the thing is that what I find so remarkable, so extraordinary, is that this is all because the West wants to allow the Israelis to carry out genocide in Gaza and now in Lebanon. The West is fully supportive of genocide. And it is quite, and look at the last 2-3 years. Have you seen any parliament in Europe sanction the Israeli regime? Have you seen, I mean, as we speak, Iran is being sanctioned by Western countries. Every few days, there are new sanctions against Iran. Are there any sanctions against Israel as they carpet bomb Lebanon? I mean, in Gaza, Western media looked away. Then they said, well, we don't have a presence there. We can't comment on the accusations, even as we were every day watching like kids' legs sticking out of flattened apartment buildings. The Western media was trying, and they were constantly sticking with the fake claims of child beheadings and the fake stories of rape. They went with that for at least a year in order to help the Israelis carry out their genocide. And then when it no longer would stick, they gradually looked away. And then when the momentum across the world began to grow against Israel, then the West tried to calm things down by establishing this fake ceasefire in Gaza. Since Trump's fake ceasefire in Gaza, which regional countries are totally complicit. I mean, Erdogan in Turkey, he has blood on his hands. Abdullah in Jordan, Sisi, all of these regimes have blood on their hands because they allowed Trump to establish that fake ceasefire in there. When they went to Egypt, they whitewashed his crimes. But the point is that that ceasefire, since that ceasefire, over 1,000 Palestinians have been slaughtered in Gaza. Since the ceasefire. I mean, and many of them kids, like just kids going home from their schools in tents. Their schools are in tents. Or kids shot in the head while they're in the tent studying at school, or just or just 2-3 days ago, they burned a family alive. I retweeted the footage of you could see someone's body moving in the middle of the fire. But I remember there was footage of this last year. There was so much global outrage. This time it's like people are just numb and it's like, whatever. So now they're doing the same in Lebanon. So Iran is saying, part of the deal, if we want to open the Strait of Hormuz, is just stop killing people in Lebanon and Gaza. And what Trump is saying, and what the Americans are saying, and what the Zionist lobby are saying is that no. We have our deal, and let us carry out our genocide in Lebanon. Let us carry out our genocide in Gaza. And Iran is saying, no, we won't have a deal unless you stop this genocidal war. It's amazing what the argument is over and what it's about. And then Western media, if you look at Western media, they pretend as if things are normal in this part of the world.
And let me ask you, do you get any optimism or so from this here that 6 countries sanction enablers of settler violence in the West Bank, UK, Australia, Canada, France, and New Zealand, and Norway, and said they will take further measures if Israel fails to respond to the situation? I mean, it's not Gaza, but it is the West Bank and it is the Palestinian people. Why do you suppose that there is some willingness on Western countries to take action here when not on Lebanon or Gaza?
Well, that action is also fake. The crimes are so extraordinary. I mean, just 2-3 days ago, they shot a 7-month-old baby in the head in the West Bank and killed the kid. And even when in Western media, I saw on Twitter, on X, the part where they show like the news or headlines, and it was trying to justify it. And it's just so outrageous, the way in which everything that the Israeli regime does. In Lebanon, these are Hezbollah strongholds. In Gaza, so they've been slaughtering people. I mean, I'm sure that on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, Sky News, the BBC, New York Times, Guardian, what they're going to continue to do is just say Hezbollah stronghold until the whole country is destroyed. Hamas till everyone is slaughtered in Gaza. That's how it is. And then they'll put some government, some countries, because of public pressure, they'll put these token sanctions on a couple of these crazy fanatics in the West Bank, whereas all of them are fanatics. But that's just to silence critics. Otherwise, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the EU, the British, the Americans, of course, they're all a part of this genocide. They are a part of the genocide. They're enablers of the genocide.
So this kind of sounds to me like that we are very far from having this war come to an end. If the Iranian side is genuinely affixed that the primary issue is no longer about $24 billion or sanctions relief, but on ending the fighting against the Palestinian and Lebanese people in Gaza, West Bank, and Lebanon, then that's a pretty tall order, because that means the United States can't just release funds or whatever. They have to compel the leader of another country, of Israel, to actually back down on stuff, or there's not going to be an end. Is that a fair statement?
Well, in Gaza, Trump supposedly already has a ceasefire, and the Israeli regime is killing people and it's taking more territory. So Trump's ceasefire is not being adhered to. So it's not the Iranians have a bit of a problem in Gaza, because these regional regimes whitewash Trump and legitimize his fake ceasefire by going to Egypt. And I remember Trump calling Erdogan his friend who was always there when he needed him, and Netanyahu put his hand on his chest. And so for Iran, there isn't much room for maneuver. I guess Iran, the most it could do is say, okay, at least implement your ceasefire and prevent them from killing more Palestinians, and tell them to go back to the yellow line that was agreed upon. That's right now. Netanyahu wants to take another 10% of Gaza. That's against the agreement. But Trump says nothing. So the Iranians in Gaza, their demands are less because the ceasefire was agreed upon by all these countries, and Hamas was forced to accept it too. But in the case of Lebanon, yes, the Iranians will not allow the Israelis to remain in Lebanon and to carpet bomb. That's just unacceptable. But the other conditions remain. I mean, the Americans will have to give Iranian assets. They're Iranian. They're stolen by the U.S. government, and they have to be handed over. And we've already had many agreements with the United States and between the United States and Iran, and every time the Americans cheated Iran. So the only way for Iran to make sure that they will be honest this time around is for them to end the genocidal attacks in Lebanon and to hand over Iranian assets.
And so, just I know we're running short on time here, but as I can piece this all together, both the things you've seen and the things you've said, is that the likelihood, or at least the possibility, is that this war could drag on for an extended period of time, maybe even past the end of the year, potentially, because there's some major things that have to happen, not just the release of the money, which is a huge political problem for Trump, but the physical issues on the ground in Lebanon and for the Lebanese people, both in Beirut and southern Lebanon, which is going to be a major issue. And if that doesn't get solved, then, as I understand from what you said a second ago, even if nothing happens and President Trump doesn't strike after this helicopter at some point, Iran is going to strike if Israel continues on attacking elsewhere in Lebanon. And that would seem to push us even further back from a negotiated settlement.
Yes, I think there's a possibility that this war could go on till into next year. But what I think will happen before then is that the global economy will crash. Could the
Iranian economy survive an extended blockade of their economy into next year?
Well, for Iran, this is a war for survival, and so Iran has no option. Iran knows that if they concede anything to the United States, that Trump will only become more aggressive. Trump will not abide by his commitment. So we have no choice but to remain steadfast till, remain steadfast till the United States under Trump backs down, or Trump is removed from power, or there's a global economic depression where everything just falls apart everywhere, and the United States is forced to withdraw. Because if there's a global depression, the U.S. armed forces won't be able to remain in the region these regimes in the Persian Gulf, they'll all fall apart. We'll be living in a very different world, very horrifying situation. It'll be definitely.
And I'm sorry, we didn't have much time to talk on it. It's kind of important, though. What is your understanding of what the Houthis have declared that they're going to do in the Red Sea? Are they going to stop traffic, or are they threatening to stop traffic?
They have said that they will block Israeli regime traffic. And I think this is their first step. In other words, at the moment, they're not stopping traffic between Asia and Europe or Asia and North America. They're focused on the Israeli regime. But it is going to be difficult for the regime. It's going to be costly for them. But this is also a warning shot, because if the United States attempts to escalate, if there's another war, it's already been said that at the axis of resistance, they will support one another. So the Iranians went to the aid of the Lebanese. Yemen went to the aid of Gaza before. Now they're all interconnected. So if there is a war, they're all going to join in. And I think that will be a very different type of war than what we saw during the 39 days of fighting. It's going to be much more intense, probably shorter because the American problem with ammunition. But I think it will be a nail in the coffin, the final nail in the coffin for the global economy.
Okay, and real quick, one last question. If the United States...
I still have a few minutes, don't worry.
Okay, good. To the extent you have, if the United States says, all right, you know what, this is too costly, we can't have a global depression, we can't have a domestic one, we're just going to leave. We're just going to claim victory, whatever you want to do, but we're going to take our troops, we're going to end the blockade, and we're going to roll out of there. But Israel doesn't, and they continue on. Would then Iran turn all of its fire just to Israel, or will they continue to fire even against the U.S. if Israel keeps fighting?
I don't think that the Iranians are going to tolerate continued genocide or genocidal strikes in Lebanon. I think that the Iranian strikes, when the Iranians responded, I think they fired like 20 missiles at the Israeli regime. That was much larger than the Israeli regime strike on Beirut. So it wasn't some token attack. And then when the Israelis struck Iran, the Iranians hit back even harder. So I think that's a very important message that the Iranians are sending. And the fact that Trump himself said, we should do that. And Netanyahu, by the way, humiliated Trump because Trump said he's the guy in charge. He calls the shots. Yeah, he's going to tell Netanyahu not to do anything, and Netanyahu did. So that Trump's telephone conversation, it's reporting, humiliated Netanyahu, and now Netanyahu has humiliated Trump. But I do believe that the Zionist lobby and the Israeli firsters still have the upper hand. So,
but if the United States withdraws and it stops fighting, would Iran stop shooting against U.S. targets and only go against Israeli if they continue fighting?
This is pure speculation, of course, and I'm just saying this based on my own assessment. Since the United States would probably be using its planes to refuel Israeli jets, and it will be assisting the Israelis in any attack, defending the Israeli regime when Iran responds, I would imagine that Iran would target U.S. assets in the Persian Gulf region.
Well,
or if the Israelis
to get out of this.
Yeah. It's complicated. Or if the Israelis target Iranian critical infrastructure, the Iranians will go after the critical infrastructure of the Israeli regime and the countries in the Persian Gulf because the United States is assisting the Israeli regime and they have a presence in the Persian Gulf. I hate war. I've survived 2 chemical attacks. The West gave those chemical weapons to Saddam. I was shot. I have shrapnel wounds. I've been to Syria many times. I saw what Al-Qaeda and ISIS do. Despite the propaganda in the West, they were very vicious and extraordinarily violent, much worse than the previous regime. I have been to Iraq. I've seen ISIS, what it does in Iraq. I've seen war. I've been to Lebanon, and I went there right after the war, the 2006 war. I was there when Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was martyred by the Israeli regime. I've seen war. I hate war. But at the end of the day, for Iran and the people of this region, this is a fight for survival. They know that this is a project for the greater Israel. They saw the American ambassador in his interview with Tucker Carlson say that if the Israelis take the region, that's fine with us. They know that the Israelis will wipe out the population of southern Lebanon, they'll wipe out the population of Gaza, and they'll wipe out the population of the West Bank if they're allowed to do so. So there's no option left but to resist. There's no option but to stand up and fight. Because if you don't fight, they're going to come after you. Just like during the 12-day war and the 39-day war, especially the 39-day war, the Americans came to destroy Iran. They massacred kids on day one. They murdered the leader. They carried out double tap attacks in Tehran in multiple places across the country. They went after the critical infrastructure. Trump said he's going to wipe us off the face of the earth. He's going to obliterate us. He's going to send us back to the Stone Age. He's going to erase our civilization. This is what we're up against. But we have no option but to fight, to resist. And we can't allow the extermination of Palestinians in Gaza and or the Lebanese in southern Lebanon. That's just not an option for Iran and its allies. For Erdogan, for Abdullah in Jordan, for Sisi, they're after their own interests. But for the sake of the Iranians, they cannot forsake the Palestinians and the Lebanese. It's just not doable.
Well, I hate war probably as much as you do, and I would love to see this going to end, but we're going to have to come to some sort of mutual agreement on everybody, or it looks like it's going to continue on. And I hope that that's not the way it turns out for the sake of all the people in Iran, in Lebanon, even in Israel and throughout the regions. I would love to see all the killing stop, but the first thing we got to do is examine the actual nature of the problem and what it will take to get this over. And in that regard, we were very grateful for you coming in and giving a very clear, concise view. We have breaking news. According to the Central Command and now starting to be many other media outlets, the United States has once again attacked Iranian territory. According to the Central Command, the forces began launching self-defense strikes against Iran at 5 p.m. Eastern time today at the commander-in-chief's direction in response to yesterday's downing of a U.S. Army Apache helicopter. The mission is proportional response to unjustified Iranian aggression. Now, listen, this is a breaking situation right now. We've got a lot of potentially conflicting information. Some things are unclear, some are not. There is a couple of responses here. I want to see what the Iranian side is saying. And this is from the Iranian side, Fars News Agency. If I can bring that up on the screen here so you can see it. The Fars News Agency is reporting that sounds of explosions have been heard in the Hormozgan area. Moments ago, the sound of several explosions was heard in eastern regions of Hormozgan, including, I'm not even going to try to pronounce those, Sirik and Minab. The exact locations of these explosions is not yet known, but sources report air defense activity in some parts of the province. Further updates will come. Meanwhile, I also have from some other sources saying that, let me see if I can pull this up here on my screen anyway, says that one of them matches up to Sirik Port Naval Base, Bandar Jask Naval Base. the defense of Bandar Abbas, 6 explosions in Qashm, which I'll show you a map here shortly. That's in the Strait of Hormuz, and Shahid Rarbar Minab base. So apparently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different bases have been reported as being hit by the United States so far. So CENTCOM is saying this is a proportional response to an Apache H-64 attack helicopter, which was allegedly shot down by the Iranian side. Now, initially this morning when we first got up, we heard that a helicopter had gone down, but according to everything that like the Washington Post, for example, that we looked at on our show early this morning, said that CENTCOM was not responding to anything. They had not responded to any kind of reaction to what happened, only that the helicopter went down, and that the pilots were later rescued in the water, and that's unclear how they went down in the water, but were still able to have flotation devices, I guess, from their ejection seats or whatever. But that by itself is also a little bit odd, because they were rescued with a drone, a naval drone actually went to rescue them. So that was kind of interesting on its own account here. But then things started getting a little bit more strange, because as it goes on through the day, and actually Gary has this up on screen. We had this was up during this, popped in right before one of our shows earlier today, and President Trump said that he was informed by the military that the Iranians shot down one of our sophisticated Apache helicopters while patrolling over the Strait of Hormuz. There were 2 pilots involved. Very important. Both are safe and uninjured. So he says, nevertheless, the United States must of necessity respond to this attack. So first of all, the president was not clear on what shot it down. Was it small arms fire, machine guns? Was it an anti-aircraft missile of some sort? We didn't know. Well, subsequent to the day, apparently citing sources in the Pentagon, you had CNN and CBS both reporting that it was a Shahid drone. Now, that got my alarm bells floating, because I'm saying, hang on a second. First of all, a Shahid drone is a point-to-point target. You launch it from wherever your origin point is, and then it lands at the target it's sent to. It flies from point A to point B. It doesn't have any kind of internal navigation that can allow it to go in different directions other than to follow a course. It doesn't have to go literally straight, but it's not navigable. It's not maneuverable in the sense that it can autonomously or even remote control be able to navigate and move, etc. Not designed to hit a moving target. It's designed to hit a ground target. And so the idea that that a drone, that drone in particular, is going to be able to hit an AH-64, which is one of our most sophisticated helicopters. So one can wonder, how is it that they didn't even know that there was another aircraft in the area? That's another part that just doesn't quite add up. But that this enemy aircraft that can't maneuver was able to apparently sneak up on an AH-64 and then hit it. But then even that doesn't pass the common sense test. A Shahid drone has a large warhead on its nose. That's the whole point of it. It's a suicide drone, and you've seen many examples of those that we've shown you over the years, but because they were used in the Russia-Ukraine war and have been used extensively here by Iran. They have a large explosive warhead in the front. And so if it had hit a helicopter, I promise you the pilots would not be safe and unharmed. It's what it sounds, the evidence and what's been described sounds the most plausible is you had some kind of mechanical error. That's why if the story had been that they were taken under small arms fire or something, that would be plausible, because perhaps some of the bullets hit some of the instrumentation or some of the lines and caused it to start to wobble, and it was going down, and so they ditched the aircraft in the sea. That would be plausible. But then it got hit with a Shahid drone is implausible, because the drone itself is not navigable, so it can't chase down a moving target in the air. And even if you just accidentally flew into the flight path, then it's going to destroy the thing entirely. It's a huge explosion. So that by itself, at least what's reported so far, we have to acknowledge that there's all kinds of things that can happen, and inaccurate information could come out. And especially in the moments like this, where it's literally been 1 hour since this even started. So it's possible that some of that information is wrong. I hope so, in the sense that the alternative is that this is just made up. And it's just a sad commentary on our age, when I cannot take CENTCOM at face value. I cannot take what the President of the United States says at face value. We hear it, and I say, okay, I hear what you said. Let's look for evidence. And we saw that just, about a week ago when Central Command said that Iran had launched missiles at Kuwait in retaliation for what Israel had done previously and what the U.S. had done. And CENTCOM said all the missiles were shot down. Everything got knocked out. We didn't lose anything. And then when the sun came up, and I even said this at the time, I said, we'll see. When the sun comes up, we'll see what we find out. And sure enough, when the sun comes up, we found out that the Kuwaiti International Airport had been hit with drones. And we ended up showing you some of those videos. And those were probably Shahed drones. That's what Shahed drones can do. So, Gary, if you can find that image of the Kuwaiti airport being hit with the Shahed drone, that'll give you an idea of the firepower of one of those. And you can just decide for yourself, would a helicopter, which is obviously one of the most susceptible airframes that there are, be able to survive a strike like that and not go down, even if somehow the Shahed drone was able to navigate and manage to get to it? Because if it didn't happen that way, if that's not, this is one of them here. So this is actually from earlier in the war, and you can see that is a Shahed drone in the top of it. So you can see what kind of explosive power that has. Now, just imagine if that hits anywhere on that helicopter, nobody's going to survive that. Nobody. It's going to rip the helicopter to pieces. Nobody can eject. Nobody can get out the door, etc. And this isn't like a fighter jet, by the way, folks. It's not like that you can hit the eject button and you have the seats pop out like you do in a fighter. As I understand, you actually have to go out the door here, and that's going to be really hard if you've been hit with something of a shock like that. We'll see how that's going to work out too. But let's take a look at, like I said, some of the claims about what's happened here. Now, it became clear after President Trump signed that signed that Truth Social, where he talked about he's going to respond. We had, as it turned out, Professor Morandi on the show at the time. And you may recall, if you saw that show earlier today, we asked him what would happen if that was the case. He said that Iran would unquestionably retaliate. And based on their recent history, they have not been, it's not a tit for tat situation. It's not okay, if we get hit with this one thing, then we're going to hit something similar on the other side. He said they're going to double it. They've been going above that. And of course, you have the claim by the United States, even at face value. One helicopter was allegedly knocked down by enemy fire of some sort. And then we claim that we have a proportional response. And then, at least according to the early news here, potentially up to 5 different bases have been hit. Does that sound proportional to you? I mean, if you were saying something proportional, you would be tit for tat. We lost a helicopter, we would take out something commensurate on their side, if that's what you were trying to do. But if we genuinely did hit 5 different bases, and again, I have to caveat this as saying this is early reporting, and I can't guarantee that is true, only that's what people are reporting, which does match up with some of the Iranian reporting as well. So it's probably close. That's not proportional. Well, if Iran employs that same category, that same mentality, then their proportional response will probably be something bigger than the 5 targets that were struck against them. All that's going to do is continue this going up the ladder of escalation and expanding the potential war here. And let me show you something that Abbas Araghchi wrote earlier in the day when it became clear that President Trump said he was going to respond. Abbas Araghchi wrote back on his X account, said foreign forces in proximity to our territory are at constant risk on account of their own human errors, plane accidents, or potentially being caught in a crossfire. To reduce risk, best solution for them is to leave. We prefer the language of diplomacy, but we speak other languages too. And so, in fact, I think on this map here, if I can blow this up a little bit, Qasem Island is this one right here. So that's in the Strait of Hormuz, and this is where Qasem Island is. And if that's the case in Bandar Abbas, if I'm not mistaken, it's not on this map. I think it's right up in here. It's a naval territory up in that direction as well. But you see that the Iranian side is not only is not going to be cowed, but they're going to expand. And then, so we have to get into the question is, what was the purpose of this?
Hey, Dan, we have some reporting from ABC News. John Carl, their reporter, was on the phone with President Trump after the CENTCOM had announced that the bombing had begun. And you can just read. He has just a brief readout of what they talked about.
Okay, well, let's see. ABC News Chief Jonathan Karl was on the phone. I think it's very important to respond. They shot down a helicopter, and we are responding as we speak. I believe in responding in a strong manner. I always have throughout my life, and we have a deal that was very good and probably will still be. The president continued. This is a response to what they did. They did with the help. They did with our helicopter last night. I believe the response should be very strong, very powerful, and that's what this one is. Okay, well, that one sounds like probably what the 5 bases that we've heard have been hit are. Not exactly like the proportional response CENTCOM says, so we're not even on the same sheet of music there. And if someone thinks that 5 bases for one helicopter is proportional, then you have a very interesting set of definitions. But what is President Trump trying to accomplish here? Okay, in that, he said, thanks for bringing that up, Gary. The timing was very good on that. He told Jonathan Karl of ABC News that this is because I have to respond very strongly. But Gary, if you can put that one back up there, because then there's some other really curious things in his response I want to get to there. He said, I have always throughout my life wanted to respond in a strong manner. And we have a deal that was very good and probably will still be. What are you talking about? Is President Trump in his mind, does he actually think, I'm going to show them how strong I am? So they hit a helicopter, allegedly, and so I'm going to go and hit 5 bases, and we don't know what's been hit there. I think it's already in dark there, so we'll have to wait for the sun to come up to find out what kind of battle damage there has been, and I'm sure that there'll be satellite imagery and other things as time goes on. But whatever was hit, that's going to be something that's bigger from the Iranian side. Does President Trump think, after everything that we've seen, after everything that they have been doing, even in the last week or so, about how they have responded when somebody hits them or their proxies and their allies, what they call them, in Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's going to cause them to stand down, that they're going to think, oh, snap. All right, we shouldn't have done that, I guess. Boy, that showed us. Let's crawl back into our hole here. Or okay, Mr. President, sure, we'll have a deal on terms that you like because of what you just did to our helicopter. Does he think that's the case? I mean, it would be the height of irrationality if he did, because the only rational response we can expect from the Iranian side is more attacks. And if you hit 5 bases, I would wager that the Iranian side would hit at least 5 different targets and maybe even more. And then the question is, and one of the biggest problems I have with our current government is then what? So before you strike one thing in retaliation with this helicopter, surely, I'm praying anyway, that there were no shortage of people in the White House, in the Situation Room, or wherever he did this, that said, okay, what is the expected response to this? And if they do something commensurate here, what would we do then? Is that going to help our situation out from where it was before the helicopter went down? The answer is self-evident. No. Because now what are you going to do? Just put yourself in President Trump's position now. He's allegedly ordered this because a helicopter got hit. Now, what is he going to do when 5 different bases get hit? If they actually do go tit for tat, if Iran actually does only say, all right, we got 5 bases hit, we're going to hit 5 bases yours. Okay, if this is what Trump did on one helicopter, what is he going to do when 5 bases or 5 American targets of some other commensurate value get hit? Is he then going to do nothing? Because that's what he should have done in this helicopter, if that's indeed what happened. And you have to look. Recall when I think toward the end of the active phase of the war, when we allegedly had lost a pilot, and we went in with C-130Js and a bunch of smaller helicopters. Remember, we had this big fiasco on the ground, and the 2 of these big birds were burned on the ground. We saw all that wreckage. There were 4 helicopters that were knocked out. We went in and got our pilot back, and we just kind of bragged about how we'll pay any price to get our people back, and nobody was injured and all that. Did you hear anything about afterwards, after we lost so at least 6 aircraft in that strike? And what did we do about it? Did we go back in and say, let's blow up 6 other bases or whatever, something like that on the Iranian side? I don't recall any. Maybe somebody can put in the comments here if there was some response, some direct response to that. I don't remember one. Well, then why would you want to go in on this one here because of one helicopter? And allegedly, what you said just last night was that we have a deal largely done. If the idea was to get out of this war, you have it in your hand. And I've been told from sources inside the administration that we did have a memorandum of understanding that would have set us on a course to end the war through negotiations. The MOA, so people are clear on that, that's not the end of the war, but it would be set into effect a longer-term ceasefire with the expectation and the intent to reach a negotiated settlement on the bigger issues to end the war outright, which would start by opening the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. blockade would come off. The Iranian blockade would come off. That was in your hand. All you have to do is agree to the memorandum. But, and this is according to Professor Morandi, who himself is aware of what these negotiations are going back and forth right now, and from some administration sources I have. So I have it from two completely separate sources saying the same thing, that there is largely an agreement that was already done at the memorandum level to start the process of getting the war over. And the first big victory is opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you were sitting on the cusp of that, knowing the damage this is costing at home right now and the compounding problems that this could cause later on, especially with these fertilizers and other kinds of issues now, we're in harvest time, we're probably already going to start experiencing some of the problems with that. Why would you want to put all that at risk by striking back for a single helicopter right now? Even if that did happen, even if what's being reported is true in some miraculous way, there was a Shahi drone that didn't blow up the helicopter, that did disable it, did put them in the drink, and then they were able to be rescued out later. You didn't lose any pilots. No one was even hurt, according to the president himself. Why then would you want to go and risk this? It just doesn't make any sense. It's just not passing the common sense test to me. Well, let me take a look here. This is, I'm looking at the moment at this is the Wall Street Journal is reporting on this situation here. And a couple of interesting things they also point out. The downed aircraft on late Monday set off a race to find the two crew members. They were rescued by a drone boat, as I had said there. And then we talk about what President Trump had said. Iran's foreign minister, Qasem Garibaldi, said in an interview with Al Jazeera that Tehran's forces did not deliberately target the U.S. helicopter. That was one of the other things I wanted to point out there, because some of the other Iranian sources had said ahead of time that we did not do this, that we did not shoot down a helicopter. You recall Professor Morandi, when he came on the show this morning, he said right before he came on that he inquired of two separate military sources at the government level, and they both said, no, we didn't shoot down anything. Now, you may think, of course they're going to lie. Are they, though? If they shot down a helicopter, that's something that would have been affirmed at the highest level, and they would have had a reason to do it. There would have been a reason to do that, to deter us, to keep us from doing reconnaissance, whatever it may have been the case. We also have to wonder, why was an H-64 over the Strait of Hormuz anyway, over the Persian Gulf? Why was it operating out there? What was the mission? What mission would it be doing? We're not conducting combat operations. So that's another question that needs to be answered. Why was an H-64 even there? And was it by itself? Was it part of a larger formation? Those kinds of questions need to be answered. Not many people are even asking them right now, but that's kind of an important one. But whatever he was doing there, and if the story was true that Iran shot it down, then they would have some reason to do so. And they have not been shy about taking credit for everything else they've done. So why this one thing would they not take credit for? It's just not adding up. Now, what I fear is, and then I'll be watching very closely to see what the Israeli response to this is. Are they going to take advantage of it? And will they go back to attacking Hezbollah in Beirut, especially? Now, Iran has been very clear that they're saying they're not going to accept, a continued Israeli attack against the Hamas, Hezbollah fighters anywhere in Lebanon, even in the southern part, but definitely not in the northern part, as Professor Morandi detailed out earlier for us today. In fact, he told us, I asked him point blank at the end, I said, is there a scenario whereby even if nobody else attacks Iran, and Israel doesn't go back into Beirut specifically, if they keep doing these other things? Because remember, they had attacked earlier today into, I think it was one of the cities on the Tyre, on the coast, on the Lebanese coast. And I said, if they keep doing that and keep killing people, 9 people were killed in that strike there, would Iran take action? And he said, eventually, I think they would. He goes, I don't think that they're going to be passive with that, because saving their brethren there, their people in Lebanon is as important to them as protecting their own people. Now, what is Israel going to do about this? And now that we've seen that this is opened back up, is Israel now going to exploit this opportunity and go back to striking even in Beirut? So keep an eye on that, because if Israel takes advantage of this, then that's going to open up the door to a new concern of mine was this coordinated between the U.S. and Israel all along? And did we forget about trying to have an end to this? We just wanted to spark it up and then claim that it was Iran, because if we can count on Iran with the retaliation, just like if we had lost here, if Iran had shot that down, they would expect a U.S. response. Now that we have hit them, we can expect a response here. And one wonders, are there people in either Washington or Tel Aviv that are hoping Iran does that, and that they're hoping that Iran does something bigger than what happened to them, so that we can point the finger at them and say, they're the ones who sabotaged this peace. They attacked one of our helicopters, and then when we did the normal, appropriate thing and defended our troops, this self-defense measure, this is what we've said out loud, then all of a sudden now the thing spirals out of control and there is no negotiated settlement. We blame Iran. Let me tell you something. I don't know if that's the truth or not. We have cloudy information and imperfect knowledge and inadequate information so far at all. Plausible, no doubt, because of things that have happened in the past. But even if we did that, what in the holy hell? How is that going to help America? What would help America is not even if we got the helicopter hit, was not retaliating and saying, let's don't have any more of these. We didn't lose any lives, so we dodged a bullet there. Let's get this war over with, get the strait opened up, start to relieve the pressure economically, and start to get the fertilizers out so the next planting season we don't have this problem. All those things are good. Going back to conflict, I don't care who you blame it on. If you want to blame it on the Iranian side, if you want to blame it on the Israeli side or the American side, it doesn't matter who was the one that started back up. We will lose. You understand that? We are going to lose. If this war continues on, if the two blockades remain in place, forget about the physical destruction of returning to war. It can get a lot worse, because if the gloves come off, then of course we're totally screwed, because now Iran definitely will do what they have said, and they're going to start hitting GCC countries. They're probably going to ask the Houthis to shut off the Bab el-Mandab, not just to close it off to Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, but to close it off for everyone. There's every real possibility they can do that. The Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq could be activated as well, and there's been some recent attacks in some of the Kurdistan areas of Iraq in recent days. Those things could escalate and rise up there as well. We could find ourselves in a conflagration. The whole place could get on fire. And if Iran starts doing what it's doing, you're talking about it's not just anymore a matter of a diplomatic and political settlement and an agreement on a piece of paper to get the flow of oil back going on. Now there's physical destruction that can take years to get undone. And now the damage is just locked in. So there is no good thing about doing this for us. It is all negative and it's all bad. What we should do is and it may be too late already to do this. What we should have done is to not retaliate for the helicopter. But now that we have, I don't know how President Trump's going to get out of it, because he made that statement to Jonathan Karl that Gary showed us a second ago, to where he's saying, I want to look tough. I've always been tough about tough. Okay, I don't give a damn about looking tough. In this position, I don't need someone to look tough. As the president of the United States, I need someone to act wisely. I need someone to show actual leadership that knows that to be strong means sometimes keep your mouth shut. Sometimes keep your weapons in your pocket. It means not taking action if doing so may satisfy an emotional need in the moment for you, but could harm the interest of the very people you were elected to lead and protect. That is what he should be doing now. But now then that decision may be taken out of his hands. I don't know how that's going to work now, because we're at the mercy of whatever Iran chooses to do. And again, it's going to be pretty hard for President Trump to say he took all this action because of a single helicopter that was allegedly knocked down. And then what is he going to do? Nothing? If there's also now a strike on multiple targets, and especially if they're significant. Yeah, that's the one that he wrote right there. very strong, very powerful. And that's what this one is. Yeah, it's also very foolish because it's now started into a series of events that we're now out of control. Now, however strong he may consider himself, he is powerless about what happens next. And again, I hope that people in the administration are already planning on what the expected range of retaliation may be from the Iranian side. And then what are you going to do? See, if you wait until that happens, now then you're you're just, it's like being in a whitewater rafting situation with no rudder and no paddle. You're just going down the water, and the further you go down, further you get away from the shore, the more the rocks start coming in and the white water, and it can turn you upside down. You have no power over it. That's not tough, folks. That's not smart. That's not wise. It's powerless because now he has to wait and find out what the Iranians are going to do. And I just have a lot of concerns about what can happen. Gary, before we jump off the air here, have you seen anything new? Any other information has come out since we've been on the air here?
No, Dan, I've been watching CENTCOM's X feed and just other sources. Nothing new. No, that Jonathan Karl
that's
phone interview was the latest.
All right, let me check a couple of other things here real quick, just to see if there's anything new here. Okay, Abbas Arakchi, 4 minutes ago. Despite its defeats on the battlefield, the U.S. opted to test our determination. Our powerful armed forces will leave no attack or threat unanswered. Leave our region if you want to be safe. History of the Persian Gulf has many chapters on dire fates of intruding outsiders. 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes ago. So I just have to ask, did President Trump think this through? Did the national security folks, thank you, Gary. Yeah, if you could blow that up a little bit. Did they think this stuff through? I mean, it certainly doesn't look like it because now he's saying that. He just wrote that. Our powerful armed forces will leave no attack or threat unanswered. That now I'm telling you, this gives me some concern that we're not really this careless or stupid, that there were those in positions of power that knew for sure that this would happen. If I knew it, folks, if I knew it from running a YouTube show like this without any intelligence apparatus behind me to feed me, secret intel information, that they knew it. And now here he is, Abbas Arakchi, while we're on the air here, has validated and proved it. They are going to strike. I promise you, this is not some empty threat here. You talk about wanting to look tough. I mean, now then, the same issue is on for Mojtaba Khamenei, the leader, the supreme leader of Iran, the IRGC, and believe me, they have been chomping at the bit because they have wanted to been striking back, and they didn't really want to go down the peace path anyway because they felt like it was necessary to deal a blow. They're now going to be elevated in the Iranian decision-making process because it's looking like they were right, that if you try to go down a peaceful negotiation, if you try to reach some kind of a deal, that it'll just encourage the U.S. and Israel more, as we see Israel continues to do in Lebanon, and now here we have done again. And so now then, these people, these hardliners, especially Rezai, I think his name is, who's the supreme leader, senior military advisor, who's been on the interviewed a number of times we've shown here. He's probably going to say, hey, we need to do something much bigger, because you can see where the logic on their side is going to say, hey, how about this? Instead of just tit for tat, instead of just saying, all right, you took out 5 bases, we're going to hit 20, or we're going to fire 50, 100 missiles, not just 2 or 3, not just a handful, not just something commensurate with what happened, but we're going to try and reestablish deterrence. I know that this conversation has been going on in Iran for a while, and some have been thinking that. Who knows if we have not unleashed the powers outside of our control, and that may be not what happens next. And again, if that does, then you can count on President Trump and Israel to say, oh, well, we're not going to be passive in the face of aggression of the bad guys, and so we're going to do something back, and now then we're back in the war. And all Danny, the negative things I said just happened.
And then just earlier today, Galibaf had posted this.
Galibaf says, we prefer the language of diplomacy, but we speak other languages far more fluently. Break your commitments and we'll switch to what we speak best. You ride the horse you saddle. Now, it's important to know that Galibaf is the speaker of the Iranian parliament. He is also a former IRGC officer. I think he was even a general. He has combat experience too. So in this alleged separation that we keep talking about, and the diplomats and the IRGC and who's in control, there's really no daylight between any of them, because even all the diplomats were in the IRGC, or they were in the military. Most of them have combat experience, and they're all part of the same apparatus. They're all part of the same team. And now then the conversation, the views of the Iranians, the militant guys like Ghalibaf, he said, look, I'm happy to have a negotiation with you one hand, but my other hand, he's a former military guy. So he says, I speak this far more fluently. So I really worry that he was already thinking about this before it happened. So I don't think this took anyone in Iran by surprise. So it wouldn't also surprise me if there's not a retaliation before we even come back on the air in the morning. They may already be ready for this. I don't know. Oftentimes they take their time. They don't do things haphazardly, and they do think things through a little bit. So we'll see what happens with that. But if they already had target lists already set up and what they had anticipated based on what Trump said before, they may already be ready to strike back. So it could come quickly. We'll see. But it seems pretty likely to me it's not going to be a tit for tat situation. They're not going to go after one helicopter or even 5 targets. If that's what turns out to be hit, when the sun comes up, we'll certainly know more information. Okay, yes, and that would probably be on the Qasem Island that I showed you on that map a minute ago. Likely that would be on Qasem Island. That's in the Strait of Hormuz, and that's kind of what's in the middle of it. So I'm also now one of the other things to watch for is does the U.S. strike the island there, the one where they have all their oil facilities up in the north, Karg Island. That's been on the news for quite a long time since this, and you've had the likes of Keith Kellogg has been begging Trump since the beginning to go after that. We haven't so far. We hit some military sites on there, but we didn't hit any of the oil infrastructure. Keep an eye on that. That's a barometer. When you see any oil infrastructure hit on Karg Island, if we ever go after that, then it's game on and gloves off. All right, so what do we have here? This is from the Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Says it will soon deliver a heavy response. So folks, just get buckled up, because this is not going anywhere anytime soon. It's almost certainly going to expand. We may well be staring at the resumption of full-scale combat operations. It's just hard for me to imagine how this doesn't turn into that. We dodged a bullet last weekend when we had the Israeli side first attacked targets in Beirut. Iran responded with missiles against Israel. Israel fired back missiles against Iran. Both sides said, all right, that will not turn it in. So it didn't explode then. This one, I think, is going to explode. It's pretty hard to imagine that Iran, unlike that one where it's like each side fired off something and then they all said, all right, we're good to go. We're not going to do anything for a while. I don't think that happens this time because I think that too many people in Iran feel they have made every diplomatic offer and opportunity to bring this to a diplomatic close, and we keep bombing them every time it gets close. We did 2025. We did it in February, and now it looks like, again, when allegedly we were this close to a diplomatic solution, and now here we have attacked these bases, apparently a pretty good size one, off of an alleged attack on a helicopter, which may or may not have happened, or that Iran may or may not have ordered it. That's one of the problems here that of being too quick, firing from the hip. I mean, who knows if whatever may have brought this helicopter down, if it was brought down by some kind of enemy fire, was it a rogue element? Was it some of these militia? Because there's a lot of people that are armed in the area. Or was it something from the Iranian government? I mean, that's critical. It's really important to know who launched and who ordered what. And to just fire it from the hip and just say, well, it happened over there, must have been with their knowledge, so let's go hit this stuff, because then you take what would have been a possibility to bring this to an end, and now then we have shattered it because President Trump wants to look strong. Don't lose sight of that, folks. No matter what happens from here forward, this fire was sparked by how President Trump responded to the allegation that an enemy fire brought down one helicopter. Listen, I get it. I served in the armed forces. I know what it means to say, hey, we're not going to leave our troops unprotected out there. Because I can hear some people already saying, oh, well, yeah, you think that the president of the United States, the commander in chief should just turn a blind eye and let people attack our people left and right? Of course not. I'm the first one to say, no, they should protect our troops. But as the commander in chief, not just an emotional person, not supposed to be just an emotional person. You're supposed to see the bigger picture. You're supposed to see that if I respond here and then they counter respond, what is going to be my next action, et cetera. You're supposed to be thinking all this stuff through so that you think, is it foolish for me to attack and to respond in this way that's likely going to get more people killed and more things attacked, and then it's going to put me in a position where I have to respond again? You see what I'm saying here? You've got to have some wisdom. You can't just be firing off the emotions here, because if this blows up the way I fear it's going to, this spark started because of President Trump. Let's be blunt and let's be crystal clear. He has started a chain reaction here, which has some pretty predictable responses. So far, most of the things Gary's showing you here on the screen that people are saying are things that I told you is likely, just based on the knowledge of the region and the actors we're talking about. And so far, they're behaving exactly the way we thought they would. And they're putting out stuff even while we're on the air here, validating our concerns. So we'll see what happens next. So first of all, when the sun comes up, we'll find out what was actually hit on the Iranian side. And we'll see if even before the sun comes up, are there going to be commensurate strikes here? Because based on that last comment here by the IRGC, they may already have targets set. They could be firing it before the sun's even comes up. We'll certainly be on top of all that for you, like we have been on this too. Just something to keep an eye on, folks. We are going to be on top of this as it happens, but buckle up, as they say, because I have a bad feeling that we may be back at full war. More on that later. Thanks very much for being with us today. Really appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, we don't have sponsors because we
Well, we are going to have to move on here to our next topic because our guest is waiting for us. We're going to be discussing, well, what do we discuss every week because it's just never ending? The war on Iran, which, by the way, is at day 102, which is kind of insane. And the fragile ceasefire that's been sort of holding since April is now on the verge of collapse again, though now it's not again because a lot happened over the weekend, including the fact that Israel defied Donald Trump and struck Beirut's southern suburbs. Iran responded with a missile barrage at northern Israel. Israel then bombed Iran, and then the threats continued. And then now they've both taken a step back again. This is, of course, happening while U.S.-Iran U.S.-Iran negotiations are still technically ongoing. But this is definitely a new chapter in this escalating war. It's the first time Iran has really stepped in to bomb Israel on behalf of one of its allies. So to help make sense of where this is all headed, we're joined by Trita Parsi, co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute the Quincy Institute, and one of the foremost experts on U.S.-Iran relations. Please forgive me, everything today is, for some reason, hard to say. I also want to mention about Trita that you can follow his excellent analysis at tritaparsi.substack.com. Trita, welcome to Breakthrough Live.
Thank you so much, Rania. And based on that introduction, it sounds like you're really tired of talking about U.S.-Iran relations.
I think we all are.
Trust me, I'm right there with you. I am so tired of talking about it as well. So if you want to talk about anything else, I'm game for it.
We can ask you about the Knicks.
Yeah, we can ask you about the Knicks. But no, it's just, yes, of course, I think we've all reached that point where we're just like, it's the same thing over and over again, but in different ways. But actually, this was a new significant shift that took place this week. You know, Israel did, as I mentioned, defy Trump and bomb Beirut. And then Iran, of course, responded by striking Israel directly for the first time since the April ceasefire. So now Iran is basically signaling that even Israeli attacks in Lebanon could be a red line to the point where they would actually intervene militarily. That is new. That's a first. So I'm curious if you could explain, why is that distinction so significant? And does it represent a genuine, durable shift in the regional balance of power?
Yes, this is very significant. Whether it signals that shift or not remains to be seen. But what the Iranians are trying to do is, after having restored their own deterrence, they're now trying to extend that deterrence towards Lebanon. And for the first time, as you mentioned, an attack on a third country has prompted a strong Iranian missile response against Israel. The reason why that is something that concerns the Israelis so much, Netanyahu calls it a new equation, and I think he's correct, because in that new equation, if it gets established, it means that Israel's power in the region is starting to be checked, meaning it will no longer have complete impunity in its maneuverability in Lebanon and Syria and other places. Now, of course, at this point, it doesn't even seem to be fully clear whether this is all of Lebanon or whether it is at least starting off with Beirut. This is significant because we have to be honest. For the last 2 decades or so, Israel has essentially enjoyed complete maneuverability and impunity in the region. It can bomb almost anywhere it wants. The only reason why there was some pushback is once it actually struck Doha. But the very idea that it could even think of striking Doha is an indication of how far Israel has moved forward its positions when it comes to this. And, we always take a look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and despite all of the ICJ rulings and all of the resolutions and all of the political commitments, reality is that there's never been any military force to back up all of the demands for Israel to stop committing war crimes, stop annexing territory, or stop committing a genocide. For the first time, there now seems to be a willingness and a capacity by a state in the region, incidentally, it's not coming from the West, in the region, to actually put some hard power behind the warnings, threats, however you want to describe it, when it comes to Israel's aggression against other states. This is not an attack that happened in order to get Israel to completely cease to exist, but rather because it was bombing Beirut relentlessly. And this is an equation, of course, that the Israelis are adamant about making sure it does not take hold. They want to have that complete maneuverability. Israel believes that its only way to be secure is for everyone else not to be secure. So the question is, did the Iranians establish this new equation? Well, the Iranians attacked. The U.S. said that they didn't want to see the Israelis respond. The Israelis nevertheless responded, but it does seem like their response was far less than what it could have been. Both the Iranians and the Americans are hinting at that. Now, both of them may have a self-serving reason to hint at that. The Iranians then struck Israel again after the Israelis had struck Iran, and the Israelis did not respond, which is part of the reason I think the White House feels that they actually did manage to restrain the Israelis, not completely. Now, the Israelis have continued to strike other cities in Lebanon and in southern Lebanon. But I think we have to be very clear. Even if this equation is established, it does not mean that the Israelis will stop. It means that every time the Israelis are thinking about striking Lebanon, they will have to now think twice, and they will have to take into account, are they willing to absorb the cost that it likely will come with? Because now the Iranians may strike them every time they do something like this. That is a reality that did not exist before. Now, of course, the Israelis are likely going to do as much as possible in order to show that that Iranian strike ended up just being an exception, not a new rule. And it's too early to tell whether it is a rule or whether it is an exception.
Well, interesting you pointed out there is that the U.S. is once again making this claim that it was able to restrain Israel and reel it in. And notably, the White House claimed that it did not provide missile defense for Israel in this latest exchange, which again would be a first, if I'm not mistaken. But yet this is a common framing from the United States with regards to Israel's attacks, whether it's Biden saying he yelled at Netanyahu and was very angry at him, but then, with regards to Gaza, and then clearly green lighting everything. So does Trump really want to rein in Netanyahu, or is this a way for him to kind of wash his hands of Israel bombing Iran while it's still happening?
I don't think there's a lot of benefit to Trump. I mean, there's this theory out there that all of this was coordinated between the U.S. and Israel. I have a hard time being convinced by that argument because, I mean, what the Iranians didn't expect Israel to strike. It was different back in June, in which the Iranians truly did not expect to be bombed. And as a result, what the U.S. did with Israel was deceptive and effective in being deceptive. At this point, it was utterly clear to the Iranians. They knew very well that Israel would strike them the minute the Iranians would strike Israel. So I don't see a lot of reason. In fact, I think there's a lot of criticism that Trump's strong warnings and demands were not heeded. And as a result, Trump lost credibility. How is that to his benefit? So I do think that actually the Israelis were directly challenging Trump in this situation. And we're seeing clear evidence that Trump has significant difficulties and challenges when it comes to restraining the Israelis. I do think, however, there was a degree of restraint likely imposed. And I'll mention one thing. You mentioned that the U.S. said that they didn't participate in the defense of Israel. Now, there's U.S. officials that say that they were. I don't know if it's true that they were or they were not, but I would suspect that the degree to which the U.S. intervened on their behalf and shot down missiles was probably less than what we saw before. This is not a binary in which you either support or you don't support. There are nuances and gradations here in between. During the war, the United States expended more interceptors shooting down missiles that were heading towards Israel than Israel expended interceptors. So the U.S. did more to defend Israel than Israel did itself to defend itself. If you now suddenly have a scenario in which the U.S. either didn't at all or did it to a lesser degree, that is more than just an angry phone call, because I absolutely agree with you. These angry phone calls are even more tiresome than listening to me talk about U.S.-Iran relations at this point. But if there actually was a material withdrawal of some degree of support, probably not enough, that is a different development. And I think from the Trump administration standpoint and from the Iranian standpoint, the Iranians want to see the U.S. prove that it can really restrain Israel. And I think that's a fully understandable demand from the Iranian side. They want to see that the U.S. actually can do it and is willing to do it, because otherwise, what's the point of a deal? From the Trump administration side, they are not willing to do it until they have a deal. Because if you actually do fully restrain Israel, which means that you actually have to withdraw a lot of military support, you're going to pay a massive political cost. And they don't want to pay that political cost unless they know that there is a deal. The same situation, but somewhat differently, actually existed during the Obama years as well, in which the Obama administration did not want to go fully out against the Israelis and AIPAC back then until they knew that there actually was a deal that they had in hand that they could be defending, rather than taking that fight, expend the political capital, and then find out that, oh, we actually don't even have a deal. So now we don't have a deal, and we have a fight with the Israelis that was unnecessary. So in between that, again, it's not binary. I think the two sides are trying to see, okay, was there a gradation in between that was acceptable to both?
That's super interesting. Like the idea that none of these conditions will actually be met until there's actually a deal, in terms of like restraining the Israelis on something like Lebanon, or in terms of even like releasing Iran's assets, right? Mm-hmm. That is a part of the negotiations as well. And that kind of brings me to my next question for you, is that these U.S.-Iran talks are still technically alive. And one of the sticking points, in addition to Lebanon remaining a pretty central part of this, which, by the way, I think has surprised a lot of people, because in the past that seemed like the ceasefire on Lebanon was just kind of on the list of conditions, but would eventually like sort of be compromised on. But the Iranians are still demanding it, and they demonstrated that this week. But also, you know, the issue of releasing these $12 billion in frozen Iranian assets is obviously a major sticking point. And so Iran does seem to be using these strikes to also pressure Trump to move on that, maybe. Is that, do you think, a smart gamble, or does it risk giving him a reason to walk away entirely?
Sorry, if I understood correctly, you mean so that their demand for the release of the assets is a smart strategy, or that it will cost them something on Lebanon? No, I think the reason why some of these issues have become real sticking points is because there are real red lines. I think the Iranians are very serious about making sure that they get some of their asset unfrozen in the early parts of the MOU. And from the Trump administration's standpoint, the optics of that is too Obama-esque, and as a result, they want to avoid it. Just to have a little bit of a background on that, the U.S. has frozen somewhere between 120 to 150 billion dollars of Iranian money as a result of sanctions. This money is Iran's money, and it's sitting in a bunch of foreign banks, not in the U.S. at all. I don't think a single dime is in the U.S., frankly. And the Iranians want roughly 10% of that unfrozen at the outset, 12 billion. Might be even less than 10%. And 6 billion of that, incidentally, was already promised by Biden to be released back in 2022, when there was this unwritten agreement between the US and Iran and a prisoner exchange. But then after that prisoner exchange, you had these protests in Iran around Mahsa Amini. And then the Biden administration completely reneged on their deal, and they never released the assets. So from the Iranian standpoint, it's actually asking for 6 billion, in addition to the 6 billion that was supposed to be released before. But again, I think this is an issue of optics. I think the Trump administration is very worried that it will look too similar to the Obama deal, that they will get attacked using the same arguments that Trump himself used against the Obama deal, and want to avoid that scenario. Here's where I think, however, they may be making it worse for themselves. The longer you wait, the more the debate and the conversation about the deal will be about what Trump may or may not give. Whereas if you actually swallow that cost and make a deal right now, you can go on the offensive and you can change the conversation to what you got in the deal rather than what you gave. But as you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, all the conversation is going to be, oh my God, is it going to be cash loads of money going to the Iranians, and plenty of time to fill the air space on mainstream media, repeating all of those different things that happened under the Obama administration. So in my view, if you want to avoid that conversation, strike a deal and take advantage of whatever you're gaining in that deal and go on the offense to sell that deal instead of defending things that you may not even have agreed to, and you don't even have a deal to begin with.
Well, Trita, before we let you go, I just wanted to ask one more question, which is that, again, it's kind of crazy. Now it's been 102 days since February 28th, when in a lot of ways the world was changed forever, and when this war began. And there's, almost constant ceasefire violations. Lebanon is being devastated, and diplomacy, as you outlined, keeps stalling. So what does an actual off-ramp look like? I know you said that it's important for them to take the deal, but we know there's also, significant U.S. military assets that have been deployed to the region, similar to what we saw in Venezuela ahead of the attack on Nicolas Maduro. So what does an off-ramp actually look like, especially in terms of the military attacks, and who has the leverage to actually make that happen right now?
Look, at this point, there is no other game in town than this diplomacy. And if it was up to me, I would have structured it a little bit differently, not have an MEU, another 30 or 60 days of talks. I would try to get as much done as possible right away. But now they're stuck in this situation. I really do not see any other pathway. Part of the reason why this process has not died, despite all of the attacks, explosions, and escalation that has taken place, is precisely because A, there is no other game in town, and B, both sides really, really need a deal. Trump absolutely needs a deal. This was a disaster. He should never have started it, and he needs to get out of it as soon as possible, early as away from the midterms as possible. The Iranians need sanctions relief. They needed it before this war. They have $300 billion of damages now. They have problems because some food is not coming in because the U.S. is stopping ships going into Iran. It's not just about ships leaving the Persian Gulf, it's also going to Iran. So both sides really need a deal. And that's why, despite all of these different things that have happened, all of the escalation, this process is not yet dead yet.
Well, Trita Parsi, co-founder and executive vice president of the
Kofi, follow me